Hello, and welcome to the Airco Academy. Today we'll be going over the Airco cylinder naming methodology, part 1. So let's get started. In this module we will cover cylinder classifications, cylinder types, and examples of rental transactions. Industry standard cylinder classifications. Rental, a cylinder that will generate rent and is owned by Airco Gases. 2. Customer owned, a cylinder that is owned by the customer or one that is even exchanged with an existing pool of cylinders, will not generate rent. For many of you watching this video who've been in the industry for 10, 20, 30 years, this is what you've known. This is what all distributors, doesn't matter the industry, has known. 2 classifications. Now Airco brings exchange to the table. So think of exchange as a customer having access to our pool of cylinders. This type of cylinder will generate rent if it's an uneven exchange. Also, like customer-owned cylinders, customer can have a negative balance. So you already can see that the exchange has traits of both a rental and a customer-owned. And the need for an exchange-type cylinder will become apparent once you take the various track-about modules. And we'll touch on that briefly at the end of this module as well. So what are these exchange cylinders? What are they? Well, they have blank neck rings. They have ownership that's not known. And this goes especially for the small cylinders, we call them, less than 100 cubic foot, non-specialty gas. And we'll talk about specialty gas in another module. And for cylinders marked as U.S. Army, there's 10,000, 100,000 across the world. Who owns those? Nobody really knows. And once again, consider exchange cylinders as access to a pool of cylinders. So what are the differences in the classifications? Okay, rental cylinders are owned by Airco Gases and are our property. I can look at that cylinder. It says Welder's Warehouse. That's my cylinder. That's our cylinder. That's our guy. There's that raised lettering. A customer cannot have a negative balance with these cylinders as they cannot have our cylinders before we rent them to them. How can you have my cylinder before I rented it to them? Not possible. Trackabout protects us in this regards, and I'll show you in this presentation a little bit later. Exchange cylinders are pool cylinders, and cylinders have access to our pool of cylinders. Ownership cannot be determined. The cylinder yard should be segregated so that these cylinders are staged apart from the rental cylinders. You could have the same cylinder size, the same gas, it looks almost the same, but if one has raised lettering or ownership is known and the other one doesn't, those are 2 separate part numbers. They cannot be treated the same, because if you do that in the P21 for us, it will have negative consequences, or it can. Customer can have a negative balance with these cylinders, as mentioned earlier, and rental and exchange of the same class can offset. So if I have an exchange AC4 and a rental AC4 plus 1 minus 1, they'll offset. They will not get a rental bill. And customer-owned cylinders are basically where the customer wants that cylinder back. Let's take, for example, a scuba tank. That's my scuba tank. I want that one back. Or there's my little 10-pound brand new kegerator cylinder. I want that one back. That's fine. We'll give that to you. It'll be maybe 3-5 days of turnaround, but you can get that one back, not a problem. So third-party vendors such as A-Bar for us, they have customer-owned cylinders. It's silver and orange, I believe. And the customer either has a negative balance or a zero balance. The customer balance cannot be positive. They can't owe us their cylinders. That's just not possible. If that is the case, then somewhere along the line we've done something wrong with our system or in Trackabout. And note the negative balance feature will become more relevant when you take Trackabout module 200.3. And I've embedded that into this module as well. So you'll see a little bit about that here in slide, I think, 8 or 9. So cylinder types. Rental cylinder. It says Welder's Warehouse, trust me, on the other side. That's our cylinder. I know that's an Airco cylinder. Exchange cylinder. Is this our cylinder? Is this the customer cylinders? Is this Matheson cylinder? Nobody knows, or nobody can lay claim, or maybe everybody lays claim to it. We don't know. So we treat this as an exchange cylinder. And last, customer-owned cylinder. It's orange, it's silver. When these come in, They get segregated. These need to go back to a specific customer, in this case, A-Bar. So customer-owned closed loop, as I call it. And this is a very basic flow chart, if you will. Customer brings us their cylinder. It goes right back to that customer. It doesn't flow out to anywhere else. It's a one-for-one exchange in this regard. You bring it to me, I fill it, I give it back to you. End of discussion. Very basic, very simple. Exchange, and I call this an open loop. And with this diagram here, this flow process, you'll understand why. So you have AERCO, you have a reseller, and you have a customer. Now think of the reseller, let's say it's a hydroponic selling a 20-pound CO2. So AERCO sells one or rents one to the resellers, 20-pound CO2. Reseller then sells it to a customer. Once again, this is an exchange part number, not a customer owned. This is an exchange part number. The customer then can do what? They can either give it back to us or they can take it back to the reseller. It's up to them. We prefer them going back to the reseller, do the pricing and whatnot. But in this case, the exchange can go back to whomever. It's out in the open. It's an open loop. And once again, then we could supply the customer or we supply the reseller with the refill. At the end, the return credit goes to whomever returns it to AERCO. It doesn't matter if the customer returned it to a reseller. It doesn't matter. It's an exchange. It has free reign. Now take a look at rental. And I call this a closed loop system. So we have AERCO, we have refinery, and we have a contractor. AERCO rents an Argon 336 Argon T cylinder to the refinery. Contractor's on site, shut down. He says, hey, I really need a cylinder. I've got to finish this job. Refinery says, okay, fine. Or the contractor just borrows one and the refinery doesn't know it. Contractor job ends and, I've got to return these cylinders. He returns it to AERCO. Does the contractor get credit? No. Why? Because this is a rental cylinder. You will see that Trackabout protects, not just us, but it protects the original customer from these type of errors. So you'll see the system basically pretends, I guess you will, that the cylinder came back from the refinery. And I won't say pretend. It basically does an accounting adjustment that says, hey, no, Mr. Contractor, you didn't have the cylinder. The refinery did. So in this case, the refinery gets credit for the return, not the contractor. So many of you are watching this presentation and probably asking yourself, why deviate from the industry? Why are we going to be different? Why are you making it harder? So the two industry classifications we already talked about, customer owned and rental, they're legacy from when distributors did not exchange cylinders. They just didn't do it. And most distributors have long legacies that go back to this time. Number two, it's impossible to know how many exchangeable cylinders a customer has in their possession with the old way. Well, what was bought, sold online, swap meet, etc. So the total cannot be tracked by the distributor. And the ability to inventory enough exchange, quote, cylinders for all situation is difficult for all distributors. I don't care if you're Airgas, I don't care if you're Mavison, I don't care if you're Metroplex here locally. It's difficult. So what do? We have all these one-off processes that we've used to make sure the customer doesn't receive rent. And they include turning off rent. So who turns it back on? It's something that's got to be monitored. What happens if they do need to rent a cylinder? Don't know. It's something that it's quite easy to make a mistake here. It's quite easy to lose money here. Marketing a rental cylinder with something like exchange for COC. You're using blue tape or Sharpie. Or you got the branch guy saying, hey, don't worry. I remember that we swapped one of ours for yours. That's, once again, it's manual. It's open for error. Last, we'll add a lease to a customer account. Well, how long do you make it for? Who manages it? Who monitors it? When do we remove it? Once again, you're opening up the possibility for error. With Trackabout, as you'll see in later trainings, we can actually keep track of ships and returns, and we can offset rent based on net balances. So if you have any questions, comments, or recommendations on this video, please email me. Thank you.